Thank you all for joining us again at the Multipurpose Hall for the second plenary session for the day, Thriving Together, Scaling Open Data Collaboratives. For all of us working in the open data ecosystem in and around the world, a recurring theme is the sustenance of our initiatives. Join our incredible panel of speakers to discuss how we can strengthen and sustain open data initiatives. It is my privilege to welcome the speakers on stage. Mr. Subrat Das, Program Officer for Civic Engagement and Government at the Ford Foundation's Office for India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. He worked with Center for Budget and Governance Accountability prior to this, and is one of the most significant initiatives he led at CBGA has been done on the Open Budgets India portal. We welcome you, sir. Our next guest is Ms. Claudia Jush, New Initiative and Program Development, Government Innovation at Bloomberg Philanthropies. She is a social impact strategist. In the past, she has worked with Rockefeller Foundation, Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, and is the founding CEO of Cloudera Foundation. We welcome you, ma'am. We next have Ms. Dipali Khanna, Vice President, Asia Regional Office, the Rockefeller Foundation. She drives the Foundation's universal and sustainable opportunities across Asia. She also co-chaired G20 India's Business 20 Task Force and G7 Japan's Think 7 Task Force while contributing to various boards and international juries. We welcome you, ma'am. We next have Mr. Sushant Kumar, Director, Strategy, Impact and Sustainable Living Investments, Omidya Network India. He focuses on business and excellence, impact management, artificial intelligence and data. We welcome you, sir. This session will be moderated by Gaurav Godwani, Director and Co-founder of CivicDataLab. Over to you, Gaurav.
Thanks, Riti. And thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us after a post-lunch session. For a post-lunch session, hope you had a good meal and good discussions in the workshop before. I heard a lot of workshops were quite engaging and we surpassed the time which was parked for it. So that's a good sign of a sabha, as we say, a good brainstorming session. So in this session, we are focusing more about open data collaboratives. So we heard in the morning session that there is a need for more open data out there for digital public goods to really become sustainable, really become reachable to the larger public, and have a clear citizen engagement perspective reflecting from them. But how do we survive and thrive these open data collaboratives? What are the kind of stakeholders we need to bring together to make this happen? That's something we are going to learn from this panel. And what role foundations can play to make that happen is something we would learn from our esteemed foundations who have joined us here. So I would start with Claudia Yu and request you, because you have a very diverse experience of supporting data for public good ecosystem from different foundations, and specifically different open data collaboratives in spaces like urban resilience, etc. Would love to hear from your journey, what you have seen is working, and what are some of the lessons from the Global South?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gaurav, and thanks so much for the CivicDataLab for having me here. It's really a pleasure. As you have mentioned, I've had a couple of kind of career steps, and a lot of them were connected to data. When I was still at the Rockefeller Foundation and leading the development of new initiatives there, one thing that became clear in the final years was really the role of data and how data itself is becoming a lever and an instrument in achieving impact. So where before we talked about political power, we talked about money, we talked about kind of laws and regulations, it became increasingly clear data is an instrument and a lever of its own. And that motivated me at the time to become the founding CEO of the Cloudera Foundation, which I then merged into the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And both of these organizations were really focused on building the capacity of nonprofit organizations to use these tools. And I think I've continued to be, I'm now with Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I'm leading the development of new initiatives there. And they have a data program, and I'll talk more about that maybe in a moment, but it is about kind of what are the capabilities needed for these organizations and for cities themselves to use data, because they are way behind corporates, and it's not only a question in terms of use cases and practical usage, but it is also really necessary if we want to be advocates and a voice in what is needed in terms of the regulatory environment. I think that it requires that foundational understanding. So those are kind of some of the perspectives that I'm bringing to the work. Maybe in terms of capacity building, a couple of aspects that are important from my perspective, and I will speak about that from the perspective of cities now. So I'm a little bit the odd one here, I feel, because we have heard obviously a lot about the NGO world and CSOs, and we have heard a lot about state and national level, but Bloomberg Philanthropies really focuses on the local level, on cities, and works directly with cities, because it's our belief that cities are at the forefront of where local and global problems are coming together, and that cities then really need those capabilities and problem-solving skills and data being one of them, to address those. So when I talk about capacity building, and I think the same is true whether it's a city or a nonprofit organization, it requires data literacy at all levels. It requires it. So, for example, in our case, we work with mayors, and with mayors, it's about really them understanding what is the strategic value of data and how can they use data to bring different stakeholders together for performance management, to to better deliver services for residents, and so on and so forth. But it's really at the meta level. And of course, then there are the data units, and we are supporting those and offer training for those. But it's also some of the cities that we have worked with have trained thousands of employees of city staff to kind of gain basic data literacy, to understand how in their area data can be useful, how they can kind of report on data and utilize data. So that is, I think, one of the levels of data literacy that's important to me. But I think building also on the earlier conversation this morning, where in the introductory panel we talked about AI and generative AI, I think it's also there. We have a program, we have a new platform called City AI Connect, where cities can connect with other peer cities to exchange and share learnings around what are the guidelines and the policies that are needed, the types of training, but also the kinds of use cases that are helpful. And it is a safe space for cities only, so no consultants, no corporates on that platform. But when you consider that at the moment kind of the one end of the continuum, that doesn't mean that the other end of the continuum, so the foundational data skills, also continue to be as important. How do I collect data? How do I clean data? I think all of those aspects, continue to be very important. And so those are some of the things that we are seeing. Should I stop here for now?
Thank you. Thanks, Claudia. I think that's a very helpful insight. Moving from there to Dipali Khanna, Based on your experience, what's the potential of open data collaboratives to strengthen the fight for climate action? You have been supporting several climate action-related initiatives in Asia region, and as we know, Asia is one of the most prone region to climate disasters and extreme climate events. So how you are seeing the power of data being unlocked there?
Thank you so much, Gaurav. And I'm not a technologist, but I approach technical frameworks by looking at tangible, real-world examples. So let's look at data collaboratives. When you're looking at the collaborative venture, like any traditional alliance, it really helps you to maximize the reach that you want to have through scarce resources as you're trying to combat climate change. When you look at their potential in terms of value, I'd really like to look at three distinct levels. The first one being around how do we ensure resource sharing for efficiency. And what I mean by that is that, we can't afford to have data that is duplicating our efforts. How do we really ensure open data is available? And I think we've made very good progress. Whether you're looking at public data, which is available through data.gov, or you're looking at private data, whether it's the Uber maps, or you're looking at Facebook disability maps that they're doing, or you're looking at PhonePe, public data sets. There's a lot out there. Even from the foundation perspective, we've invested in the Lacuna Fund, which is also helping us to provide open data. The fund is looking at labeling data sets to really look at critical problems, both for low and middle income countries globally. So I think when it comes to open data, there's a lot out there. The second important level from my perspective is really looking at additionality of the data ecosystem. So what additional value are you bringing, which will really need to go beyond linear analysis. So here, how do we look at cross-sectoral collaboration? And in that respect, we've been looking at, when it comes to climate, we've been trying to see the intersectionality between climate and health. So we're looking at non-health metrics to really be able to make some good predictive analytics when it comes to, for example, dengue, which we are really trying and testing out through Art Park. So at this level, one is really seeing this is a hotbed of innovations where there are numerous algorithms and data sets that are emerging. The third level is one where we are looking at sustainability and equity of the ecosystem. And here, how do we really build systems whereby we can really ensure you have real-time data that is really reliable? How do you really ensure there's equity? And you're really ensuring that, across the value chain, everybody is benefiting. How do you really respect the rights of data consumers? So all that piece becomes really important. And here again, we've been working with the Apti Institute to really see how we can advance this work. So, if you really want to be combating climate change, I think working across all these three levels is going to be absolutely critical. In the climate transition, I think it'll really be important for us to listen to the voice of those that are affected the most, and also be able to really adapt technology in real time so that it's really responding to what we're hearing. So I think from our perspective, we're very excited around what data collaboratives can do to really ensure that we can combat climate change in real time, because there's a real sense of urgency, so see a lot of potential.
Thanks, Dipali. And those are some wonderful case studies which all of us would benefit from to learning more. Coming to you, Sushant, you have a very interesting role of managing strategy, impact, and sustainable living at Omidyar Network. I want to know, what do you see the possible opportunities with open data collaboratives at your organization, and where do you see we can drive maximum impact?
Thank you, Gaurav. Thanks for having me. I work with Omidyar Network India, and in my role looking after sustainable living, we are addressing two sector level issues. One is in air quality and second in coastal resilience. And we're thinking of two drivers of change. Data platforms or data collaboratives is one of those drivers of change. And Omidyar Network India has a dual checkbook model. In India, we invest in bold entrepreneurs who are working to improve lives of every Indian. And in achieving that, we make impact investments, which is around equity investments, and also make grants or service contracts. So that's how we operate in India. And so before I talk about my reflections, just wanted to get a sense of the room in terms of people present here. How many of you already believe that in the power of unlocking value of data for combating climate change? Okay, most of the room. And how many of you are already doing something about it? Much of the room. So I guess we are among friends here. And therefore, I would talk about my experience. So with Omidyar Network, I've focused on responsible technology and on data. How can we ensure that we can unlock the value of data for the most pressing challenges of humanity, which includes climate change, which includes healthcare. Now, within that, when we started, and this goes back 5 years, we started to look at what sort of data models would be most appropriate, and therefore what sort of archetypes exist. And we did a thorough assessment of, from the likes, and a global assessment, from the likes of data cooperatives, loosely defined data collaboratives, data trusts, data exchanges, and models of open data. And after all of this assessment, there are a few things that started to become very, very clear. For many of these to become meaningful and to have meaningful impact, a use case driven approach was almost the first prerogative, almost the first requirement. Second was in terms of sustainability. We saw, and sustaining it beyond the initial pilot or proof of concept stages. Some sort of demand collaboration, a demand-led approach working with the public sector where there was longer-term funding available to invest and scale these going forward. So this was, and anywhere else, in any other pilots or formats, we saw it was incredibly hard to either continue having some sort of philanthropic funding or get it to a scale where it has meaningful impact. And therefore, the learnings that we took away were in data collaboratives of any form, whether they are open data or whether they are of a different kind where access and decision rights around access for data are based on certain rules. In any of those formats, being laser focused on use cases and bringing value is very important. Thinking upfront about longer term sustainability, which has mostly come from partnership with public sector, buy-in from the governments, has been very, very critical. I can go into some examples of both successes and failures as we talk about it.
Thanks, Sushant. We would dive into it in a bit. Now, Subrat, last but not the least, you have supported Open Data Collaborative, Open Bets India. You have conceptualized it, you have nurtured it, you have grown it, and you have scaled it. And a lot has been done. So A, just explain us how that journey has been. And B, now you're transitioning into your role at Ford Foundation on civic engagement and governance. How do you see from the other side, how can you support more such collaboratives?
Thanks, Gaurav. I'm very glad to be here amongst all of you. So I'm very new at the Ford Foundation, joined the Ford Foundation only 4 months ago. And my portfolio is civic engagement and government, but it's around a galvanizing issue, and that is around farmers' well-being, farmers' livelihoods. So it's the portfolio I am taking care of at Ford is very rural India focused. And there is a lot of work where a lot of evidence building is happening, data-driven work also. For instance, some of the grantee partners like Pradhan, they're very strong on building evidence and data and all that, but there is no such quote-unquote open data kind of work that I have seen in my very short stint of 4 months, but I'll come to it subsequently. Like how can we have linkages between this field, the open data field, and the more grassroots level work, mostly rural India focused work. I think there is a strong need for linking up these fields, and I'll come to it in some time. But I'm going to share a few observations based on my experience in my previous role. So until June this year, I used to work with a think tank called Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, CBGA. There also I focused on civic engagement, but around fiscal governance. That was my area of specialization. And so I led CBGA as the ED for almost 13 years. And in the second half of my leadership at CBGA, 2015 to 2023, I was steering CBGA's work along with Gaurav and CivicDataLab colleagues and many of my colleagues at CBGA around this Open Budgets India portal, OBI. So Gaurav used to say until January this year that the Open Budgets India portal is the largest open data portal in the world in terms of the volume of data it has. The question I used to ask him is, so what? How many people are using it? Are we doing good enough on that? So we had many conversations, but the journey started in 2015, and Omidyar Network India and Gates Foundation, IDRC and National Foundation India, they supported the setting up of the Open Budgets India portal. That was the first phase. Second phase during 2019 to 2022 was supported entirely by Gates Foundation and CBGA. So now my successor Raman is here. So CBGA continues to steer the work around Open Budgets India portal, and CivicDataLab is the technology partner. I'll just share 4 key observations that have stayed in my mind, from that journey of 8 years. It's more like the do's and don'ts. And so in 2015, one of Sushant's colleagues, 2 of their colleagues, invited Gaurav Godwani to meet me at my office in CBG. He was on his way to the Himalayas for a vacation. It was May 2015. So I was told, Subrat, if you have some time, here is this guy. He's the chapter lead for DataKind Bangalore, and he's very good, in terms of data science and open data, so why don't you meet him? I was a skeptic about using technology to unlock whatever potential is there in public finance data. I did understand public finance data really well, so I knew how messy it was, how messy the public finance data is in terms of the form. I'm not questioning the reliability of the data. That data is very reliable because everything is audited properly. But it's about the form in which the data is maintained, the data is presented. There is a reason why very little academic research happened on public finance data. Most of the public finance experts in the country did theoretical research, not applied research, because the data is so messy. If you work on NSS data or different types of databases which are clean databases, then you can, run your programs easily. But on public finance data, you have to do a lot of work manually. Anyways, so I understood how messy the data was, and so I was very skeptical that technology could actually be of much help. But Gaurav did convince me to a large extent. I wasn't 100% convinced. Then he invited me to a meeting of DataKind, where you had many pro bono data scientists, so people from different software companies had assembled there to solve problems of the non-profits. And one of the use cases or examples was around whatever CBGA wanted to do in terms of unlocking public finance data. And so there I was convinced. But then I told Gaurav that you have convinced me, so you have to be the technology lead. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. And he agreed. So our journey together started from there. First thing I would say, what technology, what data science brings in is sustainability. So that's something which is very important to keep in mind. I mean, otherwise, we can't really have, I mean, data, so many people say data is the new oil and all that, but ultimately working with data and putting data out in public domain as a public good is not easy, it's very difficult. Those who work with data, those who produce data know how difficult it is, and for sustainability you need to have technology. But then sustainability alone will not suffice unless you are also putting out in public domain what's very relevant. So for relevance, you need to have collaboration. So when you talk about data collaboratives, I think the funding support is actually the smaller of the problems, Gaurav. The bigger problem is to find collaborations or partnerships with those who understand the sector, who understand the issues really well. So I used to tell Gaurav that, look, you people are developing something which is like a very good vehicle. It's like a very safe and very fast moving vehicle, but ultimately you need us to tell you what should be the destination, where should we go. And Gaurav used to say, can we automate that also, that navigation and all that. So the thing is, we need to have, data scientists need to collaborate a lot more with sector-specific organizations, sector-based organizations to ensure that the output is relevant. And that leads to my third point, which is about uptake. Earlier this year, in February, when we had a meeting around that Open Budgets India portal, and my former colleagues, like colleagues from CBGA and CDL, they were all there. So a well-wisher cautioned us that many data portals have turned into data graveyards. What's your plan for this portal? So we knew it. That's why whenever Gaurav said this is the largest open data portal in the world, I used to ask him, so Gaurav, are we prepared for the so what question? How many people are using it? For uptake also, I think these collaborations between the data users, those who understand data, and those who can actually bring in technology, that's very important. And the other point is about what drives uptake of data. So we know that in India, we're getting a lot of data out in public domain, which is not getting used. I don't think more than 2 to 3% of the data which is out in public domain is actually being consumed, being used by anybody. It happens to data within the government system, to data outside the government system. So it's one thing to put data out in public domain. It's difficult to ensure that there is proper uptake of it, and then to sustain it. Now for uptake, I think what people, I would say what the non-technical audience wants is a complete story. They want that complete picture. So if you tell them only about expenditures, not about the outputs and outcomes from that expenditure, they're not very interested. And it's very difficult to get that complete picture, that complete story. And that's why I think organizations, civic tech organizations like CivicDataLab and others who understand technology, who develop technology and work with data, they must collaborate with organizations that have a direct interface with the community. So coming to the organizations that are the some of the grantee partners of the Ford Foundation here, working on the rural economy, on issues of farmers, like farmers' livelihoods or rural livelihoods, they understand the communities really well. They can, they can identify the issues, what kind of data is relevant, and they can also create the uptake. So I think those synergies have to be built. That's all.
Thanks, Subrat, and thanks a lot for sharing the journey we share about this collaborative Open Beds India. It brought back a lot of memories of our discussions over lunch and in-person discussions around how we can make this a sustainable platform, and we have come a long way. A lot of lessons for us as well as for the members here. So Claudia, coming back to you, I think all the panelists here, esteemed panelists here, have highlighted the need for adoption and capacity. And you mentioned that you have some success with building capacity of mayors in the global south to improve their data capacity. Is it working?
Yeah, it's working now.
So can you share some, because a lot of, here also we have got representation from NIOA and other city representatives. They would benefit from this learning, and we see a lot of similarities in India and Latin America in terms of how data is being utilized in the cities. So what can we learn from Latin American cities and other cities where mayors are proactively focusing data capacity as one of the major issues?
Yes, happy to talk to that. And maybe before I get to that point, a few points connecting to what my predecessors have said, which is, I think, building on your points and also connecting to what I'm a little bit jet lagged, so that's my excuse. It's really about the purpose. So it's really about, I think, the evolution of open data collaboratives that I have seen over the last couple of years is really about, I think in the beginning we were excited about new data sets. Data was the new oil, yes, we were all there. I think there were these new technologies and we could make data available in portals, and all of that was very exciting to see the growth. And then we saw data cemeteries. That was what happened. And I think the only way to prevent that, or the next kind of evolution, is really what is the purpose? And we need to start with the purpose. What is the question that the data is supposed to answer? And then putting together the data sets that are necessary to answer that question. And then to answer ultimately the question, because an open data collaborative is only a means to an end, is only a step along the way. Who are then the data users, or what is it used for, or how does that application take place? And I think those are critical questions that we have to ask ourselves, and that's the evolution that I'm seeing in the space, where cities increasingly are thinking about how can we kind of together through civic engagement, work with residents through human-centered design, surface what the problem is, then select the data sets, and then make it available, whether that's totally open or it's kind of a subscription model, or kind of whatever way it needs to be protected to protect privacy and ethical use. But what it additionally needs is, it needs a toolkit often. Yes, it's gotten much easier to utilize data. It doesn't require the same expertise that it required, but it still requires expertise. And so, the easier we can make the surface, and the easier we can basically fit for the use case, make that kind of menu, I think those are the pieces. A couple of quick examples to end on that, things that I personally find interesting. Buenos Aires, quite a bit of our work lands in Latin America. I think it might have to do, there are no kind of backlog systems that cities are tied to, so a lot of cities start fairly from scratch in many ways with data. So there are really a number of cities in Brazil, Buenos Aires in Argentina, Bogota, Montevideo. There's kind of a range of cities. Mexico City, I will talk about Mexico City, who are doing great things with data, and I think are kind of some of the leaders in the world, actually, because they really feel they can do things that maybe other cities in the US and in Europe, because they are tied to legacy systems, maybe have a harder time implementing. So in Buenos Aires, one thing that I found interesting is they have created the 3D city. So it's a data model that uses different data sets. And it's kind of a 3D model that kind of tells residents about land use. So where can be built, how can be built, to really give much more transparency in a very easy way, in a very visual way, what is happening in the city. So, I think I'm hearing about other of those models happening in European cities, and so I think that's probably one of the next steps that we are going to see more of, and I think that is a very, very interesting and probably easier to engage with if you are a resident, as a model. Then there are examples that I feel we already talked about. There's a city in Brazil, Fortaleza, who's doing a lot with data. I mean, it's really like one of these second-tier cities, which is really a leader in many ways. They are, for example, they had set themselves a kind of a climate change goal, or kind of reductions of emissions, and also becoming better at carbon capture. And so they have really a portfolio of interventions that they are monitoring and tying together through data that includes bicycle lanes and tree planting and kind of more public transportation. But they, for example, have also introduced something that they call thematic budgeting. So it's similar maybe to the green budgeting, Gaurav, that you introduced this morning, but they recognized that the child mortality was higher, probably not totally surprisingly, in low-income neighborhoods and kind of among marginalized populations. And so they kind of surfaced that through data, but they also used the data to basically bring 7 city departments, and city departments are often notoriously siloed, together to kind of achieve that goal through thematic budgeting in this case. So this is another example of using that. But maybe the last kind of, I find almost the most exciting example for last, which is Mexico City. I recently had an opportunity to speak with Jose Moreno, who is the head of the Digital Innovation Agency in Mexico City. So Mexico City, of course, large, 22 million inhabitants. And when the new mayor became mayor, Claudia Sheinbaum, she really wanted for what she called digital autonomy for the city. So she wanted to make sure that systems and data and processes are really being used for residents to achieve equitable outcomes. So that was her goal. And she created this kind of super agency. And so she didn't want to be beholden to necessarily private sector companies, but created this agency that employs 40 developers. So they develop a lot of the tools. Someone talked earlier about, kind of what's the role of cities in public infrastructure, or in digital public infrastructure. So Mexico City is one who has really thought about that, set that up. They have developed 25 apps. They have significantly increased the availability of free Wi-Fi across the city, so kind of the basis that is needed for also low-income populations to really engage with the city virtually or digitally. Have simplified processes, but because it's all in the city owns it, the city builds it, and the city runs it. And so they can do it in a way that's really addressing the needs of the residents. And I think they're really seeing success. And so I think that's one exciting example. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claudia, for sharing those beautiful examples. All 3 of them are quite relatable in Asia, especially in our context in India. Coming to you, Dipali, you have supported CivicDataLab conduct climate dialogues this year, and that has been a huge learning for us, where we started to bring several stakeholders together to discuss some of the pressing issues related to climate action. The Rockefeller Foundation has also supported CivicSabha. So there's a lot of support to the models of collaborations from your end. What are some of the areas in climate and health, climate and food, and climate and other sectors where you see possibilities of these collaborations to scale? And if you have any examples to share with us and we want to deep dive into some of them, we would be more than happy to listen and learn from those.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. And, I also, just based on what I heard, wanted to share that, we are seeing Asia as a land of action, solutions, innovation, and a lot of aspiration and ambition. So, and let me tell you how and why we're seeing it that way. So, for a minute, indulge with me and just imagine it's a dawn of 2030, right? And here you are in a very remote part of rural India. And Shanti, who hasn't been able to sleep through the night, has been having high temperature, has been coughing, and opens up an app and is able to actually, in her native language, speak to the app and also, tell the app how she's coughing, right? And so this app, with her consent, is able to run some algorithms and be able to advise her that she needs to be consulting with a doctor. And there's a platform at the back end that kind of ensures that, her insurance covers which doctor she can actually consult with, how all that is going to be happening. And at the same time, the platform has a collaborative where you have civil society actors, you have the health department, everybody that needs to be part of that ecosystem. And they're able to send the message out that, we are getting this kind of a response from a patient, from a couple of patients, and very quickly the platform is able to establish that there's a hotbed of some sort over here, which kind of is showing there's some spread of disease, and you can proactively address it. And this is something we're actually in the process of developing, and I hope we don't have to wait till 2030 to make this a reality. This is again being done with Art Park, where, as I mentioned earlier, on the dengue side, we're looking at things as to how we can get to that place. So that's really exciting. Another example is what we are kind of testing out with the Mahidol University in Thailand, where we have the periodic table of food, where we think food is medicine, and it's so important to create public data around the biochemical functionality and values of the different food items. And right now, as we speak, there's such limited access and research that has been done. So we really feel that, by the work that we're doing with the Mahidol University and setting up the Center of Excellence, that is really going to revolutionize how doctors are going to be prescribing medicines versus food. There's so much of merit in kind of really recommending food as opposed to medicines. So we really see that there's really so much of innovation that's happening that will really be able to help us achieve the things that we are trying to do. And again, collaboration is going to be critical. Nothing of what we're talking about could be done in isolation by any one of us. Again, as a foundation, for us, we feel our superpower is really convening. And before we talk about convening, also it's about this place. Over the years, we've invested in institutions. We made bets on institutions and made bets on individuals. So this particular place where we are sitting, the International, India International Center, is something that was actually Rockefeller helped set it up. So I think, again, there are many such institutions like the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Institute of Virology, and of course we've had Nobel laureates who've come through the capacity building that we've done. So we take a lot of pride in that. But coming to our convening power, as you were there, recently we hosted the Asia Exchange, where over 3 days we had about 150 people really engaged. And what one found really interesting was that at the end of it, people said, hey, we've had some new conversations. We knew a lot of the people in the room, but we hadn't had the kind of conversations. So I think we're always trying to really see how we can convene unusual actors together, because many a times all of us are getting very frustrated. We're just seeing the same solutions because we're talking to the same people, right? The only way we're going to get new innovative ideas is by getting different people into the room and really being prepared to have healthy conversations where we don't necessarily agree. I think that's the other problem, where we all come into the room and there's agreement, there's no dissent, or there's no candid conversation. So I think looking at the Asia Exchange, or even here, I understand, in the morning, during the workshops, they were very interesting and people were ready to confront each other. That really brings a lot of value, and that's something that we really encourage. Recently, we had a three-day workshop where we were talking about climate and AI. Again, very different perspectives, and something that we truly believe needs to happen. We've been using our Bellagio Center. I think some of you may have heard of it. This is in Italy, where, whether it was the G7 and G20, which actually worked through the Think Tank 7 and Think Tank 20, one would imagine that the conversations that are happening within both these groups is similar, but we all know there's so much of political issues that come in the being, and we really try to collaborate, convene these actors together so that they could really converge on a few issues. So we're constantly looking at opportunities to really see how across the ecosystem we can get different actors together, because we truly believe that's really going to help us make the leap and be able to really address the climate crisis. I mean, even recently at the UN General Assembly, we announced our 5-year commitment to climate, where we made a commitment of $1 billion and really wanted to do that in a way where the only way it's going to be possible for us to achieve that goal is going to be through alliances and collaborations. So everything that we want to be doing, whether it's scaling solutions or testing and developing new ideas, we are going to do it with different institutions, different individuals, and we're hoping that, Gaurav, you'll be part of that journey. So really excited about what's ahead, and the only way we can make it happen is through collaborations. Again, we use the word collaborative quite loosely. It is not easy to collaborate. Building alliances is not easy. It means really kind of coming together around agreeing on some shared values, which really are important for us to drive the difficult work that all of us are trying to deliver on.
Thanks, Dipali. And over the next 2 days, I hope most of us would find some of those shared values to build long-term collaborations, as our panelists have been enlightening us with. Sushant, you mentioned about air quality. And we are in Delhi. In this week, we can't have a discussion without talking about air quality. What is your hope in terms of combating air quality and sustainable living? What role data collaboratives can play? And as Subrat was indicating, how can data scientists, governments, civil societies, etc., all of us are present here, can collaborate to work on issues related to air quality and sustainable living? If you have any examples, please share with us.
Yeah, thanks. I wish I had all the answers that you've asked me, and I wish people in the decision-making authority also had those answers. And one thing we are very clear about, that some of those answers will come from data, and being able to not just pinpoint what the root causes are, but to also be able to do something about it by prioritizing resources does not come without data. Now, air quality is a bit of a puzzle for me. Given that every year when we have smog in Delhi or air quality changes in Mumbai, we have different sorts of reasoning, and all from well-meaning research and data platforms. However, pinpointing what actions can be taken that can have meaningful impact over a longer period of time has been hard. So what we hope to do in this space are a couple of things. One, be able to shine a spotlight on the root causes and make sure those are elevated to at the right level for decision making. There are many great institutions in India which are already working towards that. However, in terms of, this is a problem of systems change. And we are at the level that you'd say, we're staring at tipping points. And therefore, the need for concerted action is even greater. So I don't have answers, but I have hope that we will be able to, kind of support the right actors in shining a spotlight and ensure we elevate it at the right levels for decision making. And sorry, just the last point. And as impact investors, we are also looking at solutions in the commercial space, in the market-based space, where tech entrepreneurs could also come in and create meaningful solutions in their own way, in their ways about bringing in technologies that can help solve some of these problems.
Thanks, Thanks, Sushant. I think that was a very valuable advice for all of us sitting here. Now, in interest of time, we would open up the discussion for some Q&A, see if our participants have some questions for our panelists. So
I realize there is kind of frustration when it comes to the usage of open data also in India. We have the same situation in Germany. Basically, the public authorities are saying, look we have opened up all the data sets and now nobody is using it. Firstly, that's not the true. Probably you have opened up the finance data, but not the procurement data or agriculture data or whatsoever. So the ecosystem is fragmented as it was probably before. Maybe it looks a bit better in the finance area, but the situation probably in some other areas are really bad. There was a good example in Germany where our recommendation was you have to give incentives to the stakeholder to use this kind of data. So basically, when we open up the mobility data, we have invited the community to start something doing by that, but for that purposes you need money. So ask the community, ask the students, ask the startups to do something with the data, and you're going to see what will happen. So this is just my advice, how to incentivize the usage of this kind of data. But still, I don't believe that you have opened up everything that you need. You need new standards for that. You need different legal grounds for that. And I'm quite sure that in order to have really a proper environment for open data in India, you need really good legal framework, and you don't have it.
Sushant has a quick response to it.
Well, not a response, rather. I mean, you're right about the fragmentation of the ecosystem. However, there are some lighthouse examples where everything has come together for whatever reasons. And I'll take the example not of India, but of the UK. And Transport for London, to me, is one such example where mobility data, and mobility data is well understood, it can be open, their sensitivities are lower, and use cases are very clear. And there is also this potential of building on top from a perspective of making it a commercially viable business. And in terms of getting from point A to point B, which routes are easier, etc. Not to get into the details. Another thing that happened with respect to Transport for London was a regulatory aspect. Sorry, two aspects. One is the commercial sustainability. It is integrated in Transport for London, the sustainability for the data sets and the ecosystem around it. And on top of that, there's community, there are entrepreneurs who can build on top of it. There's another bit, which is as long as the public transport is being run by the government, the data is available and made open. However, the problem was when private chartered bus operators came into the play, how to make that data open and available, because private chartered operators would, and it happens in India as well, would think of data as an essential asset that they're creating out of this commercial agreement. So UK Bus Services Act kind of took care of it, where these private operators were mandated to share. So I believe many of these things from a commercial angle to a regulatory angle need to come together to make something as successful as a Transport for London, and role of communities, role of entrepreneurs in that entire stack cannot be underestimated. And we have two entrepreneurs already sitting amongst us. So this is the team that will make big changes happen.
Thanks, Sushant. I think Raman and one more, Mohak also has thing.
Hello everyone, I am Raman from the Center for Governance and Public Budget and Governance Accountability now, but I am speaking from some of the health related experience that I previously having, and also something related to the basics of when we are talking about open data partnerships or collaboration. One of the basic is that people sitting around here, not only here, but around everywhere, need to have an understanding of data ethics as well. This particular discourse of data ethics is very minimal in most of the complex systems that we have. In India, it's a mixed system that we are in. So public is there. You have mentioned, Sushant, about the regulatory systems and all that. So what kind of use the data, what kind of use we need to make of the data, and what use it is not supposed to have. when and what kind of data can be public, what cannot be public. The data privacy discourse after the national unique identity that has come up. This discourse is very open in the country, but we don't have conclusions. So we need to have, in parallel to this, making these collaborations should also look at the data related ethics. The other important thing which is related to what Subrat mentioned is the data graveyards that he mentioned. This is very, very important thing to look at. Here, we need to also look at, I have also worked on sanitation and waste management. I have always thought about data waste management. I mean, this is, no, I'm not joking about the kind of data that we generate when we do research, when we do data collection. Amount of that data that we generate with an enthusiasm, then that database is not looked at again. So how to look at, how to recycle and reuse the data that is already available. Not only, generate, making the data transparently and publicly available, but also about making use of it. That mechanism also something that we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. We would take two more questions and then answer together. Mohak and Philippe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mohak. I represent Janagraha. It's a think tank based out of Bangalore, and we run a portal called cityfinance.in for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Claudia, I was really, everyone knows about Bloomberg Philanthropies and how you're supporting city level sort of initiatives. Not in India, but outside, and we take great inspiration from such initiatives as we run this platform, and there is some sort of overlap with what OBI is doing in terms of public finance data, bringing accountability, transparency to all of that crucial data. Now, we built City Finance over the last 3 years. It's not at all open source. Now we've started thinking about it. And one of the key questions also what we keep thinking about and is a challenge is how to create, how to ensure that the portal remains. In the sense, right now we have a thriving portal, everything is good. But if our stakeholder in the government changes, everything changes, right? How do we ensure sustainability? So when we talk about sustainability of data or data systems, the best way to do it, at least in our context, in the public finance India context, is ensure that it is institutionalized into the government. That government hosts it, and there is capacity for government to keep running it. I think that is the best thing for a platform like OBI or City Finance, whatever, right? So my question, or rather, I would like your thoughts, all of yours actually, is we built the portal. Now we are thinking about open data, open platform. I think most of us in the room, we are thinking open data right at the outset, or So at what stage? What is the right stage to think open data platforms when you're, say, building something which eventually should be housed within a government system? Should you think from the day one, or should you build something, then maybe think about it? Because there are these questions about, okay, we're going to build it, but then what if we give it to the government and it's not as effective anymore?
Right. Right.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Philip from GIZ, working for the AI project there. I have a brief question, actually. So we're talking about open data collaboratives, but when we talk about digital transformation, especially for sustainable development, we also can't really go without talking about big tech, the Googles, the Metas of this world. In your opinion, and for your organizations, what do you think should be the role of big tech for open data collaboratives?
Hi, everyone. I'm Smita. I work at Agami, one of the partners of CivicDataLab in building Justice Hub. And we are particularly focusing at the OpenAI initiative on building AI solutions for law and justice. As part of that, we've been faced with a lot of challenges with getting access to open data. And Dipali, the sort of future you showed us, I think that's a very imminent future as well, right? So some of the solutions we've been working on using language accessibility on government schemes, especially using generative AI solutions, I feel like that's a future which we might see in the next 2 years. Having said that, what do you think, and I would love to hear from people in the panel, is a great incentive to allow for some of these data sets to be opened up to enable the building of systems like generative AI systems for sustainable development, for increasing access to justice? Because until and unless the technology exists today, right, we've seen a huge boom in the last 1 year in some of these approaches, but the data still remains a huge issue, especially when it comes to sensitive areas like law and justice. So we'd just love to hear any insight on incentives to opening up of data from private organizations. Thank you.
All right, I'm Valay. I'm from the India Justice Report, which is an informal collective of 6 organizations. And we rank Indian states on their capacity to deliver justice on a bunch of metrics. Subrat has been part of the founding, like the first edition, and Gaurav and Apurv and so many others here are part of it. My question, we were waiting to hear something about justice from our colleagues from across the world, but I'm not going to make assumptions. So my question is, have you come across any good models where data has been used to further justice as a public service, as an essential good from anywhere, and something that has been scaled up? That's my question.
It's more of a challenge, really, than a question. You talked about air pollution, right? Now here we are sitting in the middle of this fog. And here's what I want to ask is, we've got information, we've got enough data on the particulate matter. We've got enough about the percentage of contribution of each type of car, each type of energy, each type of burning. We've got data on the diseases it causes. We've got data on the economic loss that it causes. We've got data on what happens when the schools close. So all those kinds of losses. Now we've got this whole basket of data. But if we were to put it together, colleagues like this, we could put it together in 2 days. Then what? The government knows this. Between now and next October, when we are all coughing and wheezing and falling about, then what? How do we make that happen? That is the elephant in the room. It's not about having more data or less data. We have solid data on what causes air pollution, and also there is data, linear data, to show that when there are less fires, when there is less traffic, when there have been experiments, that there is less pollution. So then what?
Thank you, Maya. So brilliant questions, and thanks a lot all my panelists for agreeing to stay back for a few more minutes to answer these questions. Coming to the first one on data ethics, Dipali, you wanted to answer briefly about how public health, specifically data ethics in public health, and how can we avoid data graveyards based on your understanding?
I'm not sure I can answer all those questions, but anyway, I wanted to really agree with the comments that you had made, talking about the database management as well. I just wanted to introduce another element, is the whole data, the extractive nature of how we use data. Like, the consumers never get to see what we're doing, and that is really important. The other piece is capacity, right? Again, how are we really ensuring that, you're building capacities so that that rural woman who's kind of being asked to provide her data, what are her rights, what are her responsibilities, what can she expect? So there's just so much starting across the value chain, which isn't being given the relevant importance it should be given, is what I had to say. But really, in terms of just the model that I laid out, I'm really, I'm sure it'll happen sooner than later. I think, just at a general level, one of the things is that one is seeing there's data, but again, how we kind of building our policies, and most importantly, our regulations that are really speaking to our policies that will really make that change happen, you know. Again, air quality and issues that we are dealing with will need a concerted effort, and I guess the political will is going to be really important in this as well, because that's going to be driving a lot of what gets done or doesn't get done. But I'm going to leave it to the other panelists to respond to the other questions.
I think Mohak pointed out question towards you, Claudia, on sustainability of open data, when to open up data, especially when you have end goal of government adoption of the whole platform. So if you have any
Should
lessons.
I respond to kind of all of them, or that I want to?
Please do.
Maybe super quickly, maybe just starting with the last one also on air pollution, because that is a point that I feel passionate about, which is that in the beginning, when I became a grant maker related to data, that I was always asking, so who's going, if all of this works, if your data project works or your data collaborative works, who's going to take action on the data? And then a lot of people looked at me and were puzzled and couldn't really answer that question. They said, well, we are going to publish it, and we are going to write a report, and we are going to, kind of have something. And I feel that it's just a critical aspect to really think about, is this a data problem? Is this a problem where if we that where an aspect of it can be solved through data, and some problems just can't and need other mechanisms. So that's one of that. And maybe going from the back forward, opening data sets, what are the incentives for organizations? And I don't know if you were talking about commercial organizations or if you were just talking about, kind of organizations more broadly. I mean, if there's commercial value in the data, then of course it gets very tricky, and then we are probably looking at regulation and your other mechanisms. But when we are just looking at kind of what is the incentive for organizations? I mean, is that still a safe space? Can they be sure that they are not going to be, liable, that the data continues to be responsibly used, which is not that easy depending on with which data they are going to be combined, et cetera, et cetera. But also, can they learn something from that? Can they improve their data? Can they, kind of, are there additional benefits that can come back to them as a feedback loop? I thought at the head when things changed, or I think, again, thinking about the purpose and what is the best place and what's the best, kind of framing of it. But I would think about that from day one. And I think similarly, we talked earlier about cross-collaboration. I think thinking about, even in the very early days of defining the problem, can you bring multiple stakeholders around the table? So not just when the open data collaborative or the data platform has been produced, and now we are kind of looking around and thinking about how can different stakeholders using it. And maybe last but not least, someone asked about justice. Are there examples in the justice space that could be scaled up? The one example that came to mind for me, obviously, there's a lot of migration that happens into the United States, and the kind of the assessment whether the stay in the United States is being approved, yes or no, depends often on kind of the attorney and the lawyer that the migrant has access to, and kind of making the case, or if people otherwise are being deported, for example. And a lot of these lawyers, they are maybe pro bono lawyers, or they are just not good lawyers, and they are the best lawyers that these people can afford. But there is a center, for example, in California that is kind of using, kind of crunching a lot of these cases, and kind of looking across, kind of finding patterns in those data volumes of cases, trying to come up what is the best strategy in a similar case, and then advising and basically coaching the lawyer on site, the local lawyer, how to argue the case for that migrant. And so I think that is an example which really they have helped thousands, and is certainly something in that mechanism that can work. And I think I'll stop there and say thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. Sushant, quickly, if you would like to take up some of these questions. I think most of them relate a lot to your work.
Yeah, thank you. On the data ethics question, very quickly wanted to say that Subrat was earlier talking about, open data and being a purist for open data. Let's open up everything and for everyone. So I don't subscribe to that philosophy, first of all. And I think of, data collaboratives or making data available as an act of responsibility, and therefore responsibly stewarding that data falls onto the stakeholders who are part of this. And all of those questions around ethics, privacy, ensuring safety and no harms are then should be baked into how that setup is designed, whether it's platform, whether it's the access to, to whom and to what degree and for what purpose. All of these need to be thought through. In some cases, the answers are simpler. And in others, the answers are more complicated. So we'll have to, think of it on a case-to-case basis. There was a question on justice. So there's certainly, examples. I think Agami is a very good example of where utilizing data as, advancing justice. I have seen examples in the US, especially in the racial justice space, where, be it data for Black lives, or data about incarceration of particular races. Some of those led to, and some of the journalism around that led to action at the highest level. Anything else? There was air quality. Yeah, I'd come to that question last, but was there anything else?
I think that's answered. Big tech is another one if you want to take that.
Sure, and the question was around what is the role of big tech in, so there's been, I have been aware of almost all big tech having some sort of a data philanthropy from a perspective of opening up some data for good. However, in those cases, privacy protection was used as, if I may, a stick to beat up any potential of unlocking value. It may have been a real consideration as well in terms of opening up to liability in different jurisdictions as well, which I'm fairly comfortable with. However, my belief is there is massive value in being able to unlock data from the private sector. However, we have to start from the question of public interest. You can't suddenly nationalize all the data and kind of put brakes on the commercial incentives of running businesses. However, starting from public interest, starting from the 6 data sets that was put up earlier, mobility, for example, is clearly, within a city, is clearly in public interest that is hard to argue with and would be easier to begin with. So that's my limited point, and it could unlock massive scale. It's not a problem we are looking at very closely globally as well, but I wish we could. On air quality, I mean, Claudia put it, is this a data problem? I don't think it's a data problem. However, I do believe, from whatever I know, limited that I know so far, it may be a problem around how and to whom that data is presented and in what capacity of decision making do we have. It's the elephant in the room, almost in the same way as global warming is the elephant in the room. And action from actions, it's very hard to think about where does change come from? How does change happen? You have seen examples of top-down changes where a leader decides tomorrow, like we did in Delhi in the time of Sheila Dikshit, where overnight, all the public transport, the three-wheelers had to run on natural gas. It was not an easy decision. It had economic ramifications, but it happened. And then there are examples of bottom-up, sort of people demanding better. I don't know what form it is going to take, but as a practitioner of trying to work with drivers of systems change, we'd like to make contributions wherever we believe we can move the needle. And I'll close with that. But thank you for that question.
Any final remarks, Subrat, you have, especially when to open data and how to sustain it? I think that was a crucial question you would have also thought of when you were thinking about Open Buds India and other initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, that and just a couple of observations. So, in terms of what drives uptake of any data initiative, I think those who are producing the data or processing the data will also have to set aside adequate time for developing data stories to popularize any data set. So I have interacted with a number of, I would say, experts who have led data initiatives in India and in some of the other countries. All of them have said in the initial phases, we only have to analyze the data, don't wait for others to start analyzing it. You have to analyze it, you have to popularize any database, any data platform. So it requires a lot of investment in terms of time in the initial phases. Second is relating to what Raman indicated about the data waste. So somebody had asked me long back, is disclosure, is all kinds of disclosure leading to improvement in transparency? There is a difference between disclosure and transparency. So there is no point in getting flooded with too much of data. So there are some data initiatives, some databases, data platforms, which make the data machine readable, which is good. But then they present such high volumes of data that this is conducive only for big data analysts. So you are excluding many, for instance, a grassroots level non-profit organization will get intimidated by seeing that. So that person may not be a data scientist, may not be able to use data science. So sometimes we also build in such, I would say, inequalities in terms of the data users in the way we design these platforms. So the platform should not be designed only for the big data analysts or the data scientists. They should also be designed for those who do not know data science, who are not very tech savvy, but who understand the issues on the ground really well, who can pick up relevant data points and then develop their data stories, which will lead to change on the ground. And that's why I would say we also need to get rid of data. I mean, it's just because we can buy server space and have a lot of data, one should not continue to have too much of data, endlessly. And then on Mohak's point about collaborating with the government, I think that's really important. Sushant also mentioned it earlier. See, what you shared about the anxieties of the sustainability of an initiative, the quality of the data and everything, once it's completely taken over by the government, you should only look at what the databases of Ministry of Rural Development are doing. They're really good. I mean, if you look at data on any kind of government intervention, the data on MGNREGS and other rural development schemes are really good. And in terms of examples of data being used to drive change on the ground, MGNREGS is the best example. There are so many examples of people using, and it includes professors at Harvard as well as activists on the ground in the remotest of the districts in the country, where the MGNREGS portal has been, that MIS of MGNREGS has been used to drive some change on the ground. And so that you should not shy away from handing over the kind of steering of data initiative. And in fact, cityfinance.in, you have a really challenging task because of the number of, I think you have taken up all urban local bodies. That's something which puzzled me, like why did you have to cover all urban local bodies? You could have started only with municipal corporations. And I don't know how the Ukrainian initiative is functioning in the last year or so, but until 2020 or so, among the different types of, I'm talking about public finance open data initiatives, the one in Ukraine, the Open Budgets Initiative of Ukraine, which actually, I mean, they develop templates, and the city governments use those templates developed by a non-government actor to So they had to update their expenditure records with the central government on a monthly basis. They just used those templates. They adopted the templates given by the non-government partner, and the data became machine readable. So that portal got updated every month, and people could see which college, which school, which hospital got how much on a monthly basis. That was super impressive. And I mean, it wasn't possible for India because of the vast scale at which we're dealing here. But for you, you have taken up scale that, you've made it more challenging for yourself. But I think cityfinance.in has a lot of potential for actually, bringing the non-technical audience more into our world.
Thanks, Subrat, and I think that's a good segue to our next section of seeing some of these examples in practice with the Data for Public Good exhibition, which we are going to do upstairs. Thanks a lot to all of you for sharing wonderful insights from your work, and thanks a lot for engaging us more time than what we asked for. So thank you so much.